The chandeliers above the ballroom of Hartington House burned like 1,000 accusing eyes. Liora Vesper stood half-hidden behind a marble pillar, her back pressed against the cool stone as if it could shield her from the world. The laughter, the music, the swirl of silk and jewels, all of it felt like it belonged to someone else. At 24, she had already learned how to disappear in plain sight. Her copper gold hair was pinned simply. Her amber eyes stayed lowered, because attention she knew too well was dangerous. Then a voice spoke quietly behind her. Lady Liora Vesper. She startled so sharply, her shoulder brushed the pillar. A footman in unfamiliar livery stood there, face carefully blank. His Grace requests your presence in the East Drawing Room, immediately. Her stomach tightened. His Grace, the Duke of Quill. The name landed like ice water down her spine. Draven Quill, the reclusive, ruthless Duke whose name alone could silence entire rooms. What could a man like that possibly want with her? She should have refused. Every instinct screamed at her to stay in the shadows where she belonged, but the footman added one more sentence, soft and deadly. It concerns your father's final arrangement. Leora's breath caught. Her father, Rowan Vesper, the man whose death had left her family drowning in secrets and shame. Before she could think better of it, she whispered, led the way. The East Drawing Room was smaller than she expected. Intimate, dangerous. A fire crackled low in the hearth, casting long flickering shadows across midnight blue walls. And there, standing with his back to her hands clasped behind him, was Draven Quill. He was taller than she had imagined, broader, dressed in perfect black evening clothes that made him look carved from darkness itself. When he finally turned, the air left her lungs. His face was brutally handsome, sharp cheekbones, a jaw like granite, and eyes, storm gray and cold as winter steel. He looked at her the way a wolf studies a cornered rabbit. Sit down, Lady Liora, he said. His voice was low, smooth, and terrifyingly calm. We have very little time. She remained standing, heart hammering against her ribs. Who are you to summon me like this? A ghost of something, not quite a smile, touched his mouth. I am Draven Quill, Duke of Quill, and as of 3 months ago, I am your husband. The words hit her like a physical blow. Liora felt the floor tilt beneath her feet. She reached out blindly, gripping the edge of a small writing desk to keep from falling. That's impossible, she breathed. Draven took one slow step closer. The firelight carved harsh shadows across his face. Your father signed the agreement 6 months before he died. A binding private contract. In exchange for settling every debt that threatened to destroy your family, he gave me your hand. The marriage was executed quietly through legal proxy. The documents are flawless. He lifted a thick folder from the desk and opened it. Liora stared at the papers. Her father's familiar signature stared back at her. Next to it? Draven's. Her voice came out small, cracked. I never agreed to this. I didn't even know. No, Draven said quietly. You weren't meant to. Not yet. He closed the folder with deliberate care. If you refuse to acknowledge the marriage now, every creditor your father once owed will descend upon your mother and sister within days. The house, the little money left, your mother's medical care, all of it will be gone. Your family will be ruined. Leora's chest rose and fell rapidly. She could hear the distant waltz from the ballroom mocking her. This couldn't be real. This was a nightmare, wearing the face of a duke. Draven watched her in silence, those cold gray eyes missing nothing. I'm not asking for your affection, Liora. I'm not even asking for your forgiveness. I'm simply informing you of a legal reality. He paused, and for the first time something almost human flickered across his severe features. But I will not lie to you. This arrangement was never meant to be gentle. Liora lifted her chin even as tears burned behind her eyes. And if I walk out of this room right now, then tomorrow morning, Your mother will wake up to bailiffs at the door. And your sister will lose every future she still dares to dream of. The fire popped loudly in the silence. Draven took another step toward her, close enough that she caught the faint scent of sandalwood and something darker like rain on stone. I know this feels like chains, he said, voice dropping lower. But those chains were forged long before either of us entered this room. Liora stared into the flames, her mind spinning, her heart shattering. Somewhere behind her, the ballroom continued its glittering dance, completely unaware that her entire world had just been stolen in the space of a single conversation. She stood frozen between the fire and the man who now legally owned her future. And in that terrible, breathless moment, she understood with terrifying clarity that her old life had already ended. The only question left was what kind of prison she would be forced to call home. The carriage ride to Quill House felt like a funeral procession. Liora sat rigid on the velvet seat, her hands folded so tightly in her lap that her knuckles had gone white. Outside the window, the familiar streets of her old neighborhood slowly disappeared, replaced by wider avenues lined with ancient oaks. She hadn't slept. Not after that night in the drawing room. Not after Draven Quill had looked at her with those storm-gray eyes and spoken the words that still echoed in her head like a death sentence. You are already my wife. Now 3 days later, she was leaving everything behind. The modest townhouse where she had cared for her ailing mother. The small room she shared with her sister Briar. The fragile life she had fought so hard to hold together after her father's death. All of it gone. When the carriage finally stopped, Liora looked up at Quill House and felt her breath catch. It wasn't a house. It was a palace. 3 stories of pale golden stone, towering columns and windows that gleamed like cold diamonds in the morning light. The Ashworth crest? No, the Quill crest stared down at her from above the massive front doors. A footman helped her down. She climbed the wide marble steps on legs that felt like water. Inside the entrance hall rose 2 stories high. A grand staircase curved upward like a serpent. Crystal chandeliers hung silent and watchful. Everything smelled of polished wood beeswax and old money. Mrs. Grimshaw, the housekeeper, waited at the bottom of the stairs, a stern woman in her 50s with kind but watchful eyes. "Welcome to Quill House, Your Grace," she said quietly, offering a small curtsy. Liora flinched at the title. I haven't... She couldn't finish the sentence. The words stuck in her throat like broken glass. Draven appeared at the top of the staircase, dressed in a dark coat that made his shoulders look even broader. He descended slowly, each step measured. Liora. Just her name. Nothing more. He stopped a few feet away, close enough that she could see the faint shadow of stubble along his jaw, the tension in the line of his mouth. "Your rooms are ready?" "The West Wing. They were my mother's once." Liora swallowed hard. "I want to see my family. My mother is ill. My sister." "They will be provided for," Draven cut in his voice, low but firm. "An allowance has already been arranged. The best physicians will attend your mother. Your sister will want for nothing." He said it as if it were the simplest thing in the world, as if buying her family's safety was no different from purchasing a new carriage. Leora's eyes burned. "You think money fixes everything, don't you?" Draven's gaze didn't waver. "I think it keeps your mother alive and your sister out of the workhouse. That is what your father wanted." The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush her. Mrs. Grimshaw quietly excused herself. The footman vanished. Suddenly, it was just the 2 of them in that enormous hall. Draven studied her for a long moment, something unreadable flickering behind his cold eyes. "You will have your own apartments, complete privacy. I will not force my presence on you." He paused, then added more softly, almost reluctantly, "But we will be seen together when society requires it. That is not negotiable." Liora nodded once stiffly. She had no strength left to argue. The days that followed blurred into a strange, suffocating rhythm. Breakfast was served in a formal morning room at exactly 8 o'clock. Draven sat at the head of the long table reading correspondence, speaking only, when necessary, about upcoming social obligations. His voice never rose. His manners were impeccable. And yet, the distance between them felt wider than the ocean. The hallways of Quill House stretched on forever, lined with portraits of ancestors who seemed to watch her with silent judgment. Every room smelled of wealth she had never known. Every servant bowed or curtsied when she passed, calling her "Your Grace" in hushed, respectful tones that made her skin crawl. She was a duchess now, a duchess who felt like the most expensive prisoner in England. One rainy afternoon, while exploring the East Wing alone, Liora found the portrait gallery. She stopped in front of a painting of a beautiful woman with dark hair and the same storm-gray eyes as Draven, his mother. There was sadness in that painted face, a quiet kind of sorrow that made Leora's chest ache. She wondered what kind of bekeech had left such deep scars on this house, and on the man who now ruled it. That evening, a letter arrived hidden inside a book of poetry Mrs. Grimshaw had left in her sitting room. It was from Briar. "Dearest Leora mother cries every night. She tries to hide it, but I hear her. The doctors say her lungs are weaker. She asks about you constantly. I told her you are safe, but she doesn't believe me. I'm frightened, not for myself, but for you. Please write when you can. Tell me the truth." Your loving sister, Briar Liora, pressed the letter to her chest, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. She thought of her mother, Liora Vesper, once so strong and full of life, now frail and coughing in their tiny parlor. She thought of Briar, only 19, full of dreams and laughter that poverty had already begun to dim. This was the price. This golden cage. That night, long after the house had gone quiet, Liora stood alone at the tall window of her bedroom. The room was breathtaking silk drapes, the color of moonlight, a canopied bed large enough for 4 people, fresh roses in crystal vases. Outside, the formal gardens lay dark and silent under a clouded sky. Moonlight barely touched the hedges and fountains. She rested her forehead against the cool glass. "I'm still here, Mother," she whispered to her own reflection. "I'm still fighting for us." But the words felt hollow, because deep down she knew the truth. She was no longer Liora Vesper, the invisible girl who hid behind pillars at balls. She was the Duchess of Quill now, trapped in a life of luxury that felt heavier than any chain. And somewhere in this vast, beautiful prison, her husband, the cold, enigmatic Draven Quill, carried wounds of his own that he refused to show her. Liora closed her eyes, letting the weight of it all settle over her like a heavy velvet cloak. How long could she survive in this gilded cage before it broke her completely? The silence between them had begun to crack just a little. It started in the library. Draven had surprised her one gray afternoon by inviting her to review a portion of the estate accounts. "If you are to live here," he had said quietly, "you should understand what you are living with." Liora had accepted mostly because refusing felt like surrender. Now, week after week, they sat across from each other at the long mahogany table, surrounded by towering shelves of leather-bound books and the faint scent of aged paper and ink. At first, their conversations were clipped careful, like 2 fencers testing each other's guard. But slowly, something shifted. Liora discovered that Draven's mind was razor-sharp. He spoke of crop yields and railway investments with quiet intensity. Yet, there were moments when his voice softened, when he glanced at her as if trying to read the thoughts behind her amber eyes. One evening, as rain began to patter against the tall windows, she looked up from a ledger and asked, "Why do you trust me with any of this?" Draven leaned back in his chair, fingers resting lightly on the edge of the table. because fighting you every day would be exhausting. And because... He paused, jaw tightening. Because I see how your mind works. You notice things others miss. Liora felt an unwelcome warmth bloom in her chest. She looked away quickly, focusing on the numbers until they blurred. She was beginning to see him differently. Not just the cold Duke who had upended her life, but a man carrying invisible weight. The way his shoulders tensed when certain names appeared in the correspondence. The way his eyes darkened when the conversation drifted too close to family matters, especially when the name Silas Thornridge came up. Draven never spoke of him directly, but Liora noticed how his pen would still whenever that man's letters arrived, how his voice grew colder, more clipped. Who was this Thornridge, and why did the mere mention of him make the air in the room feel heavier? Then came the night of the storm. Rain lashed against the windows like angry fists. Thunder rolled across the sky, shaking the old house to its bones. Liora couldn't sleep. She had slipped downstairs to the library for a book, hoping to quiet her racing thoughts. As she approached the half-open door, she heard voices. Draven's low and strained. Mrs. Grimshaw's calm but urgent. Cannot keep this from her forever. Your Grace, I know. Draven sounded exhausted, raw, in a way Liora had never heard before. But if she learns the full truth about my father's death, about what Thornridge did, about why that contract truly existed... He stopped. A long silence followed, broken only by the crackle of the fire and the howl of wind outside. Mrs. Grimshaw spoke again, gentler. The marriage was never only about money, sir. You know that. It was protection. For both families. But secrets this heavy, they have a way of poisoning everything they touch. Liora stood frozen in the shadowed hallway, heart pounding so loudly she feared they would hear it. The marriage wasn't just about her father's debts. There was something darker. Something involving Draven's father's death, and Silas Thornridge. A betrayal so large it had bound two families together in chains of silence. When the conversation ended and Draven's footsteps moved toward the door, Liora fled back upstairs on trembling legs. She waited until the next morning. The storm had passed, leaving the world damp and glistening. She found Draven in the library again, standing by the window with a glass of brandy in his hand, even though it was barely past breakfast. Liora closed the door behind her with a soft click. Why didn't you tell me? Her voice shook, but she forced herself to continue. The contract. It wasn't only to save my family from ruin. It was to bury something worse. Something about your father. About Silas Thornridge. Draven went very still. The glass in his hand lowered slowly. He didn't deny it. Instead, he turned to face her. For the first time, the mask of icy control slipped. She saw exhaustion etched deep into the lines around his eyes. Saw the weight of years pressing down on his broad shoulders. Because I was trying to protect you, he said quietly. Because the moment you know the full truth, you become part of the danger. Thornridge is not just an old business associate. He is a man who destroys anything that threatens him. Liora stepped closer, anger and fear twisting together in her chest. And you thought marrying me in secret, dragging me into this house would keep me safe. You thought lying to me would protect me? Draven's gaze dropped to the floor for a moment. When he looked up again, the vulnerability in his storm-gray eyes stole her breath. I was wrong. His voice cracked just slightly. I have been carrying this alone for so long. I forgot what it feels like to share the burden. Or perhaps I was simply too afraid to try. The confession hung between them, fragile and heavy all at once. Liora felt tears rising. She didn't know whether she wanted to scream at him or reach out and touch the pain written so clearly on his face. Before either of them could speak again, a soft knock sounded at the door. A young maid entered curtsying nervously. A letter for her Grace. It arrived just now. No return address. Liora took the envelope with unsteady hands. The seal was plain, the handwriting unfamiliar. She waited until she was alone in her sitting room before opening it. Inside was a single sheet of paper. The words were written in elegant slanted script. My dear Duchess, everything you think you know is a lie. The contract, the debts, even the man you are bound to. Meet me if you dare to learn the truth. Thalia Vale. Liora sank slowly onto the edge of the chaise, the letter trembling in her fingers. Thalia Vale. A name she had never heard before. Yet somehow she knew this woman held pieces of the puzzle that could either free her or destroy everything she had begun against all reason to care about. Outside, the sky was clearing. But inside Leora's heart, new shadows had begun to gather, darker than before, and far more dangerous. Liora couldn't breathe. She sat on the edge of her bed, Thalia Vale's letter still clutched in her trembling fingers. The elegant handwriting seemed to burn against her skin. Everything you think you know is a lie. The words echoed louder than the storm that had passed the night before. She knew she should show the letter to Draven. She should demand answers. But something deeper, something raw and wounded inside her whispered that if she wanted the truth, she would have to find it herself. 2 days later, under a heavy gray sky, Liora slipped out of Quill House, wearing her plainest cloak and a thick veil. She took a hired carriage to the edge of London, to a quiet little coffee house, tucked away on a narrow street where no one of consequence ever went. Thalia Vale was already waiting at a corner table. She was younger than Liora had imagined. Perhaps 30, with sharp, intelligent eyes and dark hair pinned severely. There was a quiet strength in her posture, but also a shadow of old pain. You came, Thalia said softly as Liora sat down. I wasn't sure you would. Liora kept her voice low, barely above a whisper. Tell me the truth, all of it. Thalia leaned forward, her gaze steady. Your father didn't just sign that marriage contract because of debts. He signed it because he witnessed something he should never have seen. She paused, letting the weight settle. 3 years ago, Silas Thornridge murdered a business partner in cold blood. He made it look like a riding accident. Your father, Rowan Vesper, saw the whole thing. He had proof. Instead of going to the authorities, he tried to use it as leverage. Leora's stomach twisted. Thalia continued, voice gentle but unrelenting. Thornridge threatened to destroy your entire family unless your father stayed silent. The marriage contract with Draven's father was the only way out. It bound the two families together so tightly that neither could destroy the other without destroying themselves. Your silence, and Draven's, became the price of survival. Liora felt the room tilt. And Draven, he knew? He knew everything, Thalia said quietly. He has known for months. He chose not to tell you because he believed the truth would break you. Or worse, that it would send your mother to an early grave if the scandal exploded. Liora rose so quickly, her chair scraped loudly against the floor. She left the coffee house without another word, the truth clawing at her chest like sharp thorns. By the time she reached Quill House, the sky had opened again. Rain poured down in sheets soaking through her cloak as she ran up the marble steps. She found Draven in the library. He was standing by the fireplace, one hand braced against the mantel, staring into the flames. When he turned and saw her drenched and trembling, something in his face shifted. Liora, don't. Her voice cracked like thunder. Don't you dare say my name like that. She stepped closer, water dripping onto the expensive rug. You knew? You knew my father witnessed a murder. You knew Silas Thornridge killed a man, and my father helped cover it up. And you still married me in secret? You let me walk into this house believing it was only about money? Draven's jaw tightened, but he didn't look away. I was trying to protect you. Protect me? Leora's laugh was bitter broken. You lied to me. Again and again. You made me believe we were building something honest, something real, while you carried this poison inside you. She was shaking now from cold and rage and unbearable hurt. Draven took one step toward her, then another. When she didn't retreat, he slowly lowered himself to one knee in front of her. The proud Duke of Quill, on his knees. "I fell in love with you," he said, voice rough and raw. "Not on the night I told you the contract existed. Long before that. I fought it. God knows I fought it. But every conversation in this library, every quiet moment I watched you reading, I fell harder." His storm gray eyes glistened with unshed tears. "I was terrified that if you knew the full truth about the blood on both our families, you would leave and never look back. I couldn't bear the thought of losing you. Not when you had become the only light in this damned house." Liora stared down at him, her heart shattering into pieces. She wanted to believe him. She wanted so desperately to reach out and touch his face. But the betrayal ran too deep. "I need time," she whispered, voice barely audible over the rain, hammering against the windows. "I need to breathe without your secret suffocating me." That night, while the household slept, Liora packed a small bag with only the essentials. She stood for a long moment in the beautiful bedroom that had never truly felt like hers, then placed a short letter on the pillow. "Draven, I am not running away forever, but I cannot stay here right now. Every corner of this house reminds me of lies. I need to find myself again, before I can decide if there is still an us worth fighting for." "Liora?" She slipped out through a side door into the pouring rain, the hood of her cloak pulled low. As the carriage carried her away into the dark London night, Liora pressed her forehead against the cold window and let the tears finally fall. Behind her, Quill House stood silent, and imposing its golden lights, slowly fading into the distance. She didn't know where she was going. She only knew she couldn't remain trapped in a cage of secrets any longer, even if leaving the man she had begun to love felt like tearing her own heart in two. The rain had stopped, but the storm inside Liora refused to quiet. She didn't run far. Instead of disappearing into the night forever, she found shelter at a modest inn on the outskirts of London, and sent 2 urgent messages, one to Mr. Whittaker, the family solicitor, and another to her sister Briar. For 3 long days she waited heart-heavy with doubt and fear. Every shadow made her flinch. Every creak of the floorboards reminded her of the man she had left behind, and the love she was terrified to lose. Briar arrived, first eyes wide, with worry and determination. "You're not alone anymore," her younger sister whispered as they embraced. "We'll face this together." With Mr. Whittaker's careful guidance and Mrs. Grimshaw's quiet, unexpected loyalty, the housekeeper had slipped away from Quill House. Carrying hidden documents she had guarded for years, the pieces slowly came together. They found the proof. Letters, witness statements, a sealed confession from a dying servant who had seen too much. All of it pointed directly at Silas Thornridge as the man who had orchestrated the murder 3 years ago to steal a fortune. On the 4th morning, just as dawn painted the sky in soft gold and rose, Liora returned to Quill House. The grand entrance hall felt different now. All felt smaller somehow. Less like a prison, and more like a battlefield waiting for its final stand. Draven was waiting. He stood near the fireplace in the library, looking as though he hadn't slept since the night she left. His usually impeccable appearance was slightly rumpled, his storm gray eyes shadowed with exhaustion and something deeper fear. When he saw her, relief and pain flashed across his face in equal measure. "Liora?" His voice was hoarse. "You came back." She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she stepped aside as Mr. Whittaker Briar and a small group of trusted witnesses entered behind her. Mrs. Grimshaw stood quietly by the door, her presence steady and reassuring. Liora lifted her chin, though her hands trembled at her sides. "It's time for the truth. All of it." No more secrets. Draven looked at each face in the room, then back to her. For a long moment, the powerful Duke of Quill seemed utterly vulnerable. Then he began to speak. He told them everything. How his father and Silas Thornridge had been entangled in dangerous dealings. How Rowan Vesper had accidentally witnessed Thornridge commit murder and tried to use that knowledge as leverage. How the marriage contract had been created not just to save the Vesper family from ruin, but to bind the two houses together in silence, a shield against mutual destruction. Draven's voice never rose, but the weight of every word pressed heavily on the room. When he finished, he turned directly to Liora. I was wrong to hide this from you. I was wrong to think I could protect you by keeping you in the dark. I was terrified of losing you. And in trying to hold on, I nearly destroyed the very thing I had come to love most. He took a slow, deliberate step closer, his eyes never leaving hers. I offer no excuses, only my deepest apology, and my promise that from this moment forward, there will be no more lies between us. Before Liora could respond, the sound of hurried footsteps echoed from the hallway. A footman burst in breathless. Your Grace. Silas Thornridge was seen attempting to flee the city. The authorities have him in custody. A heavy silence fell, broken only by the soft crackle of the fire. Justice at last had begun to turn its wheel. Later that evening, after the others had left and the house grew quiet once more, Liora found Draven alone in the garden. The air smelled of damp earth and early spring flowers. She approached slowly, her heart beating with a mixture of lingering hurt and fragile hope. Draven turned at the sound of her footsteps. He didn't speak. He simply waited, giving her the space she needed. Liora stopped a few feet away. I spent the whole night thinking, she said softly, about everything we've been through, about the lies, and the moments when I saw the real you beneath them. She took a shaky breath. I'm still angry. I'm still healing, but I also see a man who is trying to be better than the legacy he was given. And I choose to believe in that man. Draven's eyes glistened. He took one tentative step forward. Does that mean? Liora gave a small, tearful smile. It means I want a real wedding this time. Not because of any contract, not because of duty, but because I choose you, Draven Quill, freely, with my eyes wide open. A simple ceremony took place 1 week later in the private chapel of Quill House. No grand ballroom, no glittering society crowd, just family. Alaoin Vesper sat wrapped in a warm shawl, her health visibly improved by the care Draven had arranged. Briar stood beside Liora, as her only attendant, tears shining in her eyes. Mrs. Grimshaw and Mr. Whitaker bore quiet witness. When Draven slipped a new simple gold ring onto Leora's finger and whispered, I choose you today, and every day after Liora felt the last heavy chains around her heart finally fall away. 5 years later, the gardens of Quill House bloomed with vibrant spring colors. Sunlight danced across the fountain where Neptune and his horses still stood watch. Liora walked arm in arm with Draven, watching their 2 young children, a lively boy with his father's dark hair and a bright-eyed girl with her mother's copper gold curls, chase butterflies across the lawn. Nearby, Elowen sat on a cushioned bench, laughing softly as Briar, now radiant and confident in her first London season, told stories of her latest adventures. Draven gently squeezed Leora's hand. Are you happy? He asked, voice low and warm. Liora looked up at him, her amber eyes soft, with the kind of love that had been forged through fire and forgiveness. Deliriously she whispered. She leaned her head against his shoulder as the children's laughter floated on the breeze. Secrets had nearly destroyed them once, but truth, and the courage to choose forgiveness, had set them free. And in the end, that made all the difference. Finally, let me send my deep thanks to you. Thank you for listening. If this story has touched your heart, I invite you to stay with us to discover more true tales of the Wild West. Stories that honor resilience, tenderness, and the spirit that God placed in those who blazed the trail. Subscribe, share. Leave your thoughts in the comments, and join us once again to journey across this untamed land. Thank you. Aviso legal/disclaimer. These stories are crafted purely for entertainment and may contain imaginative additions or dramatic interpretations inspired by old frontier eras. We use AI-based resources, voice imagery, and drafting as part of our creative process, but every final detail is carefully reviewed and shaped by human effort to preserve emotional depth and authenticity. We strictly follow YouTube's rules regarding AI-generated content and refrain from deepfakes, altered identities, or misleading representations. All images, sounds, and related materials are lawfully obtained. Please do not reuse, modify, or distribute any portion of this content without written permission. Thank you for valuing creativity, respect, and original work.